I have to admit it was difficult to finish this talk over the weekend as I was toggling between my writing and the unfolding war and invasion of Ukraine. And I feel very aware of the privilege that allows us to gather on this call to talk about performance histories. 2 years ago, I had the honor of meeting a member of the Ukrainian parliament who was deeply interested in the democratizing liberatory agency of art created in a democratic society. I'm holding them in my heart and my mind as I speak. Today, Brian and I will be speaking about the dance photographs included in the exhibition. There's a single undated portrait of the dancer inventor Loie Fuller, and Brian will be speaking about 4 photographs of the ballet Oklahoma by Agnes de Mille. The Beinecke does not have a lot of materials related to dance, which gives the slender representation of the art form that is there a sort of charged poetics. In dealing with Beinecke dance materials, you will always be dealing with a partial picture. But all of dance history is a partial picture when the live performance itself, exactly as it was, is unrecoverable. Still, as we'll demonstrate, there is a lot of information that can be drawn from archival shards when you marry close reading with movement literacy. We're using as our jumping off point Edwin Denby's seminal 1943 essay, Notes on Nijinsky Photographs. Our talk is a writing exercise enacted in real time for the students in Brian's course, Writing Dance, who have read Denby's essay. Shout out to those students at the Beinecke right now. And they'll soon be trying this exercise for themselves. Denby missed seeing Nijinsky perform live. Denby was 13 when the great male dancer retreated from the stage. And Nijinsky's dancing was never captured on film, which makes Denby's feat all the more incredible. Working entirely from still photographs of Nijinsky posing in various roles in costume, Denby tells us how Nijinsky danced. There's much more to say about this essay, including how our task today is different. But for now, here we go to Fuller and de Mille. And I'm going to screen share to the image included in the exhibition. This is a photograph of Loie Fuller. Fuller was born Mary Louise Fuller in Fullersburg, Illinois in 1862. And for over 30 years, she was the most celebrated American artist in Europe. This photograph is unlike the artist known as Loie Fuller in almost every way. Loie Fuller eschewed displaying the contours and anatomy of her body in her art. Instead, she costumed herself in voluminous silk fabrics and set that fabric aloft and alight by revolving around and around in carefully set, spectacular lighting. Her breakout performance occurred at the Folies Bergère in 1892 with her famous Serpentine dance. Subsequent dances followed, the fire dance, the lily dance, each displaying breathtaking technological ingenuity. She patented her stage inventions, stage underlighting, sets made of mirrors, costume designs that extended her arms into a sort of machine. She even sued, unsuccessfully, one of her imitators for copyright infringement. She had many imitators. Her work is now recognized as proto-cinematic. Her flowing, illuminated silk dresses were a kind of early screen. Fuller created moving images before moving image technology took off. Here's a more Fuller. Fuller sublimated herself into her stage images. The symbolist poet Stéphane Mallarmé once wrote of her, she lost the materiality of her body and became an idea. Mallarmé also said Fuller was not a woman, but a metaphor. The images she created in motion seemed non-human or post-human. As one writer described Effusively, she became something elemental and immense, like the tide or the heavens, whose palpitations imitated the most primitive movements of life, the vibrations of the first cell. It's important for me to say that there are hundreds of Loie Fuller images in the world. Do a quick Google image search and you'll see she papers the search engine. In the New York Public Library collection for the performing arts, you can find 57 photographs of Fuller. Many more exist elsewhere. In addition to countless photographs, artists have rendered Fuller in pen and ink, watercolor, colored lithography, bronze, glass, and textiles, to name just a few of the mediums. She readily participated in the proliferation of her image, lending her portrait to advertisements for soap and perfume and on souvenir swag that she sold in theater lobbies. She became a meme well before the language of memes co-opted our minds. And if you keep scrolling, and even among here, there are Loie Fuller imitators. Let's go back to our Beinecke photo. If all of the other images of Loie Fuller in the world burned, and all of the other institutional servers and cloud storages crashed, and the only thing left standing was the Beinecke Rare Books and Manuscripts Library and this single image of Fuller, what could we know about this artist? I do have the benefit of hindsight. Like Denby, I know my subject became famous. The difference is that Denby reads images of Nijinsky in his prime, whereas Fuller in this image is pre-prime. Pre-Paris, pre-Serpentine dance, pre-fire dance, pre-spawning Art Nouveau and symbolist poetry. Her body in this photograph is on a cusp. She's not totally convincing in the milieu of late 19th century theater burlesque, but also not yet anywhere close to her self-created destiny. The photo is undated and offers the range of 1870 to 1890. She was born in 1862, and she's definitely not 8 years old here. So I think we can safely assume the image was taken closer to the 1880s when Fuller was performing on a vaudeville circuit, including in New York. She looks to me to be in her early 20s. When I look at this portrait of Fuller, I think about potential. What in this body anticipates the persona and the artistic practice and the rippling cross-disciplinary impact of her art to come. And what here might contradict the reputation that eventually solidified around her about her art. She stands in contrapposto, her weight shifted over her right leg, which allows her left leg to bend slightly at the knee. Her chin, as in classical figural sculpture, tilts off to the left. Oddly, very oddly, writers in Fuller's time, as well as scholars in the past 25 years, consistently describe her as awkward and untrained. One French writer at the turn of the century went as far as to say she walked like a bird, and that bird was a duck. Anne Cooper Albright has written forcibly against this impression, and the dancer Jody Sperling has reconstructed Fuller's work to prove otherwise. It's very difficult for me to believe, looking at this photograph, that she's untrained, not least because that impression willfully ignores her 2 decades of experience in theater leading up to her fame and the knowledge a performer gains on a stage. The evidence of her technique is visible in this image. Look at her right arm. You can see in the angle of the arm, which is bent at the elbow, the negative space pops. Her arm, in concert with her shoulders, her scapula, etch a triangle, signaling an understanding of the body and space that is particular to dance. 2 other details give away the impression, the precision of her early training: her feet and her hand. Her feet form what in classical ballet we call third position, turned out, right heel touching the arched midpoint of the left foot. She wears lace-up leather boots with a small heel. You can find similar boots now on Etsy, described as Victorian high tops or Belle Epoque antique women's boots. Fuller did not, as far as I've read, have ballet training, but her father briefly ran a dance academy, and in her memoirs, she has described dancing, singing, and acting in her early career. Untrained feet don't stand like this. Also, look at her hand. Her left arm curves, her index finger extends, not at all stiff. This is a knowing gesture, which points out, I'm performing. Her left hand, I discovered, is fond of that position. You can see in this photograph a similar position of her left hand. Rhonda Garlick, the scholar, has observed that Fuller did not seduce the audiences in her performance. She did not play or portray her images as an actor might. Instead, she enacted them. You can see that intention here, even with the contours of her body entirely displayed, the hip-hugging bodice, her legs fully exposed in tights, her blunt stance rebuts objectification. This has to be one of the most matter-of-fact leggy tassels and fringe ever captured in a late 19th century burlesque performer. She has short hair, a boy cut, which nods to her frequent male roles. Fuller fused queered art and life. She lived openly as a lesbian and had a female domestic partner for over 20 years. It's hard to tell who she's supposed to be in this photo. I've gone through descriptions of her roles in the early 1880s and nothing exactly matches up. She played the lead role in William Cody, aka Buffalo Bill's piece, The Prairie Waif. She was the waif. The hay on the floor seems to match, but I'm not sure a waif would wear such an elaborate headdress. I'm not going to talk about the headdress, but boy, it's impressive. Though she's not conventionally seductive here, let's not get distracted. Fuller did have ample theatrical wiles. And I'm going to show you pictures from the Napoleon Cerrone. This is the photographer who took the Fuller photograph at the Beinecke. These are the Cerrone photos at the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts of Fuller. I'm sorry, they're so small, but I'm showing you in real-time internet searches. And this is my favorite. In contrast to those portraits, here she looks like more of a novice. Her eyes in this photograph widen unnaturally, as if she were straining to keep them open. Their wideness makes her look a little bit scared or nervous, though she may simply be focusing on not blinking as a task of the photographic subject. Look at her mouth, at the edges. You can see tension there as well. She looks determined and a little afraid. Fear and determination mixing together. Just above her pupils, you can see a reflection, presumably from the studio lighting. And maybe, just maybe, I can say this reflection hints at the Fuller to come, the priestess of pure fire, as she was later called. In the most striking contrast with her later career, Fuller poses in this photograph, but her most famous dances contain no poses. Her choreographies were all transitions, all in-betweens, all flow. She herself wrote, "To impress an idea, I endeavor, by my motions, to cause its birth in the spectator's mind, to awaken his imagination, that it may be prepared to receive the image." Her perpetual motion inspired endlessly more elaborate images and endlessly more elaborate and florid streams of words and images by other artists, poets, writers, visual artists, composers, mostly male. I don't want to follow their lead. Instead, I have the urge as I write to give Fuller her body back, to restore her body to her as a fact, not a metaphor. Here's some more facts in this photograph. Fuller has a middle to low center of gravity and a basin of hips, which undoubtedly helped anchor her spinning. Cooper Albright calls it Fuller's strong sense of center torque. Her thighs silently star in this picture. The potential energy in her thigh muscles alone portends modernity. The strength and sagesse visible here in Fuller's physicality enabled her to create human networks in performance. The dozen or so stage technicians she placed carefully around the theater who responded to her cues while dancing, flickering their lights on and off to create her effects. That's technique, uniquely defined. The philosopher Henri Bergson theorized a turn of the century shift from the ancient, which he identified as form, to the modern, which consisted of pure transitions and flow. Fuller birthed 20th century modernism. I love this image of Fuller pre all that. She looks like she's gathering knowledge, organizing, preparing. Stillness is the flip side of motion. I'm going to turn it over now to Brian.
Thank you, Emily. And thank you to the Beinecke for having us. So I'm talking about Agnes de Mille, and in an exhibition entitled Brava, Women Make American Theater, it's very clear why de Mille would be included. She was a pioneer as an artist of the American theater and as a woman in American theater. Just for context, the American modern dance that developed in the early 20th century was largely a matriarchy, led by such figures as Loie Fuller, Isadora Duncan, Ruth St. Denis, Martha Graham, Doris Humphrey. But ballet and Broadway were boys' clubs with very few female choreographers. De Mille broke into those clubs and changed them. You can get a little glimpse of that, of how she did that, in a letter that's in the exhibition. I can't show it to you, it's up there in the exhibition, but it's 1942, and de Mille had heard that Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein Jr. were going to make a Broadway musical out of the play Green Grow the Lilacs, the musical that would become Oklahoma. And de Mille thought she was the right person for the job of dance director. This is before the term choreographer became widely popular in Broadway. She thought she was the right person for dance director, and she had proof. The cowboy ballet Rodeo, or as she pronounced it, Rodeo, which she had just choreographed for the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo with this great Aaron Copland score, and herself in the lead role of the spunky, comic, lovelorn cowgirl who tries to ride with the men and gets ignored and only wins a man's love after she puts on a dress for the hoedown. Now, de Mille wrote this letter to make sure that Rodgers and Hammerstein would come see the ballet, which was a hit at the Metropolitan Opera House, and the letter worked. And she got the job, and Oklahoma, which ran for years and years, made her the most famous choreographer in America. Her name printed in ads right alongside the stars and the composers, which was never done. And the choreography she did for Oklahoma changed American theater. We'll talk about it a little bit, but today we're doing this special thing, which is about photos. There aren't any photos of de Mille herself in the exhibition, but I'm going to show you one from the Beinecke, a couple from the Beinecke, just so we know who we're talking about here. screen is going slowly. There we go. That's her. These are from Carl van Vechten photographs. The Beinecke has tons and tons of his photographs. Let's see here. I like some of these down here too. There's one up here I wanted to show you. I can't find it. That's all right. That one's nice. Oh, this is the one that just notice her hands there. That might be interesting later. Emily, as Emily mentioned, we're doing something peculiar with photographs today. This is in conjunction with my Yale class writing dance, which is happening right now in one room over. And I've come over to this room and left my class over there so I can talk to you without a mask for a moment. And we're riffing on this Notes on Nijinsky Photographs, 1943 essay by the dance critic Edwin Denby. I share Emily's marveling at how Denby never saw Nijinsky dance, is able to glean such incredible insight and information from these still photos. It's a different way of seeing, really. And I thought I'd give my students a similar challenge, and Emily and I are taking up that challenge as well today. Emily with that single unrepresentative photo of Loie Fuller, and me with a couple of images of de Mille's works, not of my choosing. So of the photos in the exhibition, the one that's most frequently reproduced is this one. Enlarge it. These ladies appear in the most famous dance section of Oklahoma, the Dream Ballet that ends the first act. It was Hammerstein's idea to end the first act with a ballet, but these ladies are definitely de Mille's conception. As she told the story in speeches and interviews and memoirs, Hammerstein had something light in mind for this ballet, a dance to make the audience happy enough at intermission that they would come back for the second act. And de Mille wanted something darker, more dramatic, more important to the story. She wanted the dance to reveal the psyche of the main character, Lori, to clue us into that character's dilemma. It's not the most grueling dilemma. Lori has to choose which man she will let escort her to the picnic. But that's what happens in the Dream Ballet, also called Lori Makes Up Her Mind. She makes up her mind. And that advancement of the plot integrated dance into the story in a way that was previously unusual for a Broadway musical, and was part of this new style musical play that made Rodgers and Hammerstein the kings of Broadway for a while. Now, in de Mille's conception, Lori is torn. One choice is Curly, the leading man cowboy she loves, and in the ballet, the actors playing Lori and Curly are replaced by dancers, a dance Lori and a dance Curly. And in this other photograph in the exhibition, you can see them. That's them. So you can see dance Curly, dance Lori, and you also see what Curly represents. The wide stance of those chaps covered legs, providing a sturdy base against which she can swoon and be lifted. So that's one idea of romance. The other choice she has is Judd, the cruder farmhand she claims to hate. Now, de Mille thought that Lori was secretly, subconsciously attracted to Judd, to the sex represented in these naughty postcards she's seen on his wall. And that is who these women are. They are the postcards come to life, that titillating, frightening fantasy. In de Mille's recollection, she told Hammerstein that the show needed more sex, and he was a little shocked, and she was proud of shocking him. You can see some of that in the photo, this good girl's idea of what bad girls are like. And you can also see how each woman is slightly different, not only in their naughty girl dresses, but in their wrists and their faces. This lack of uniformity was on purpose. In contrast to the standard chorus line of anonymous women, de Mille gave each dancer a character to play through the whole show. You can see a little of that here. And that individualized characterfulness, I think, along with the outfits, probably accounts for why this photo is often reproduced. But the photo that strikes me the most is this one. Probably because it's the most mysterious. What is happening here? Well, the back of the photo identifies the dancer as Bambi Lin in Oklahoma. She was a student of de Mille, and de Mille fought to have her cast into in the show. In de Mille's first autobiography, she wrote a couple, she tells how the director, Ruben Mamoulian, was casting chorus girls for slim legs and pretty faces, as was traditional. In another part of the exhibit upstairs, there's a Good Housekeeping magazine in which there's a photo of the chorus girl auditions for Oklahoma and a little caption about Richard Rodgers trying to eliminate the less fit girls. So that's the atmosphere. De Mille, who thought of herself as too ugly for the stage, was looking for dancers of talent, training, and personality. Lin was among the dancers that Mamoulian initially rejected as not pretty enough, but de Mille threatened to quit if Lin wasn't hired, and she was hired. And in the 1955 film version of Oklahoma, she would play the Dream Lorry in the Dream Ballet, but that's not what she's doing in this photo. In another photo in the exhibition, this one, you can see her in the same costume, right? You also see the Dream Lorry here, who's about to get married, though the groom will turn out to be Judd, and who brings on those postcard girls. But here, before all of that, Lin is at the front of this trio of women expressing joy in these heel-cracking jump, sometimes called a bell. And that was exactly the kind of vernacular American motion that de Mille had incorporated into rodeo and that made her the right choice for this Western musical. Now, notice also how that upward exuberance is countered with the self-controlling force of these interlaced fingers pushing down at Lin's waist to keep her skirt from rising too high. In the women behind her, you can see they're caught at an earlier stage of the jump, so you can see how the hands go down as the jump goes up. To me, those hands are like the clasp on the jump, like the buttons on her coat. They say, let's be happy for the bride, but let's not get out of hand. Let's not entirely break with feminine decorum. And it's that kind of detail that de Mille was good at, finding the character and the drama in movement. Now, but this one, this photo, the one that intrigues me, those characters, none of those other characters are present. Lin is alone, and it's not a moment that I can find in footage of the original production or in the 1955 film. That makes the provenance of the image mysterious, but the image is also strange in itself. The billowing swirl of her skirt implies motion. She's on releve or half toe on her right leg, and her left leg is lifted and bent behind her in the position called attitude. She's either just lifted and swung that left leg back into position, causing the skirt to spread, or she's turning in that position, which would cause the same swirl or wake in the fabric. Her arms are also strange, held above her head almost as if to hold her up. Those claw-like hands, one slightly higher than the other, grasping the air or supporting an invisible beach ball. There's something tree-like about the pose, and something triumphant in the mode of Evita, proclaiming to the adoring masses from her balcony. But those arms frame a face that looks blank, yet within that blankness, sad and frightened. The circular hat and the chin strap spotlight that sad, frightened face even more, like a halo in a religious icon, making the image more unsettling. Just look at that face for a moment. I can't help but think of it as the face of the dedicated dancer that the director said wasn't pretty enough, the face of the dancer who maybe feels some of the insecurity of her teacher, the choreographer, who fought to get her in the show. And now I see a little bit of Fuller's face in that other image, that mix of fear and determination. In any case, the whole image is strangely stiff. Its three-dimensional quality is emphasized by the shadows she casts and by the contrast with the flat background of farm and farmland and its perspectival tricks. The compositional symmetries and asymmetries seem deliberately posed. The way that the diagonal road in the backdrop slashes behind her shoulders like a sash. As I said, this is an image of an instant of time, clearly a split second of stillness plucked out of motion. And yet this image of motion is so rigid. The arms look pinned and that skirt looks starched into position, stiff as a classical tutu. It could be made out of papier-mâché. It looks like she could step out of it and it would stay there, like those panels with a hole you poke your face through so you could take a funny photo. It makes me think of the skirts in the work of Martha Graham, who was the big influence on de Mille. The way that Graham, who designed her own costumes, often kicked her legs under long skirts so that the stretch of the fabric showed you the force of the kick, turning negative space into a solid shape for an instant. That's one reason that Graham's dances photograph so well. With Loie Fuller in mind, I also think about skirt dancing. It's a long tradition of playing, a long tradition that played with the playing of fabric, with revealing and obscuring the lower half of a woman's body. The tradition that Fuller pushed further with poles and lighting, turning playing with one's skirts into an art that caught the admiration of symbolist poets and cinema pioneers, as Emily was telling us. I think also about footage of de Mille in an educational TV program in the mid-50s. And in that footage, she's demonstrating how she created the rough cowboy movements in rodeo, the use of diaphragm spasms to convey a rider, to convey in a rider the force of an absent horse. And she does all of this in this Doris Day 50s dress with a full long skirt. And when I see that, I often think about how difficult it must have been for de Mille as a female choreographer, a difficulty that comes across very strongly in her memoirs, both hemmed in and inspired by the conventions of femininity. And for me, that footage illuminates her dramatic gift and how it operated, and also maybe why she had her tomboy misfit cowgirl put on a dress to win a man and fit in rodeo, the work that brought her success. But the first thing that struck me about this image was something harder to place. It reminded me of something. And maybe because I had that Denby essay in mind, I thought, oh, is it Nijinsky and as Petrushka, the puppet, the sad, pitiful puppet? And I looked at the images and I thought, no, that's not quite right. Though there is something marionette-like about Lin in the image, a doll in a dress. And then as Nijinsky crossed my mind, and also that halo-like hat, I thought, well, is it Les Noces, this peasant wedding ballet by Nijinsky's sister, Nijinska? I looked up those photos and that wasn't quite right either. And it took me a while to figure out that the image was recalling for me was this one. Now, this is an illustration from the sheet music of a Blackface minstrel song in 1840. And I'm very familiar with it because I use it as an illustration in a history of tap dancing I wrote. I'm pretty sure that no one besides me would look at the image of Bambi Lin and be reminded subconsciously of this pose of a white dancer pretending to dance like a black person. So maybe that's a dead end. Or maybe not, because since the positions of the arms are so similar, at once secular and spiritual, part declamatory, look no hands, counterbalance to the strong motion in the legs, and part an expression of ecstatic worship, hallelujah. Maybe without thinking about that 1840 image, you feel something like that in Bambi Lin's pose, and it pricks you like it pricks me. In any case, this image remains the hardest to read of the de Mille photos in the exhibition. The others give up more easily details about de Mille in Oklahoma, The others benefit more from contextualizing information. And I think I like this one best, maybe because it retains its mystery. Though I'm sure there's probably somebody out there who will tell me exactly what it is and deflate that mystery. As a dance critic and a historian and a teacher of dance history, it's part of my job to explain. But the aspects of dance that I love most always exceed or escape the explanation. There's always more to see, more to say. And prior to examining this photograph, I didn't think of de Mille's work in that way, as dance that retains its mystery. I thought of its achievement and limitation as dance that was fairly easy to explain, especially by an excellent explainer like de Mille herself. But this unsettling photo unsettles that assumption for me. It makes me wonder if there's more to de Mille underneath the legible surface, caught perhaps unintentionally in this photographic instant, more than I had imagined. And that's where I'll leave it for today.
Thank you so much. And we will be having questions from Brian's students that Melissa Barton will be helping give to us, and also welcome questions from the audience. If you could use the Q&A. That was really fantastic. Thank you for taking us to school and for doing such an extraordinary job in rendering 3 dimensions out of these 2-dimensional images and black and white images. It was really quite incredible. I've put in the chat links to many of the images that Brian and Emily shared in their presentation in the digital collections here at Beinecke, so that each and all of us can continue the work that you've inspired of reading these photographs and also searching for more. I wanted to begin with a big question before we get into questions from your students, Brian, and from the audience. And that is about the field and here on campus. Emily, brava to you, and thanks for rooting dance and performance studies so well here, and Brian joining it. It was not always so. This has become a fertile place for this kind of study, thanks to you, Emily, and Brian and others. I wondered if you could just sort of talk about how it's grown and what you find from students who may not be dancers themselves in a trained sense, and how this study fits here at Yale and in a liberal arts curriculum. I think you've shown in this 30 minutes the importance and how reading these can lead us into all kinds of different ways. But I wonder, Emily, if you might reflect a little bit on how the field has grown since you've come here, and Brian, if you might add into that, and the importance, which I think Melissa and I all recognize, for this field on our campus. But Emily, to you for.
Thank you for that big, broad, beautiful question, which I love to talk about. How has it changed? Well, in 2006, I was the only faculty person, and I taught a year-long course, and that was it. And I tried to put all of dance into that course, and I had a lot of guests and etc. And now, as I said, we have many faculty and many courses. The courses have always been very cross-disciplinary. So the talk today is representative of what we do. We're always talking across disciplines. Here, we're reading photographs. We're also talking about literary writing, inspired by a poet, Edwin Denby, who was inspired by dance in his writing practice. And I will say, one of the beautiful, thrilling areas of growth that was always there, but now I feel like I'm seeing it really actively, is just the sheer number of students from different disciplines and majors that are pouring into the classes. So that I'm regularly working with students from Yale College, from many different majors. Brian is too, and all of the faculty in dance. I'm also working with students from basically all of the professional schools in my classes. And I want to say, I think that's a couple of reasons that there's this hunger there for what we do. I think one is embodied knowledge, which is kind of like finding a dance photograph at the Beinecke, there's a scarcity of emphasis on embodied knowledge in the university and academia, and that's what we do. But we don't do it in isolation. We do it in connection to the disciplines that the students are coming in from, which I think helps them piece it together. They don't feel like they've gone off to some far corner of the arts universe. They're actually in their own home of anthropology or physics or environmental science, etc., or drama, and they're being bolstered with our knowledge of the body and then of movement literacy. And on the one hand, there's embodied knowledge. I spoke in my reading of Loie Fuller from the perspective of a dancer who can understand what it is to hold space. Brian spoke as a critic who's often gaining the, who has the eyes of someone who's watched a lot. And so we also spoke today.
Turning people into metaphor. Yeah.
What's that? I'll stop speaking, but movement literacy, and Brian, maybe you want to talk about movement literacy or something else.
Oh no, I was just saying that I felt that I was doing what you had said the other people were doing to Loie Fuller and turning people into metaphors.
Yeah, but that's okay. That's what you do. That's what Denby does. Loie Fuller needed to be wrenched from the metaphors.
Yes. Well, yes. I'll say that I went to Yale as an undergrad in the 90s, and there was no dance department, and it's all due to Emily. So she gets all the props there. It is remarkable the range of students you get. And maybe one thing I'd add to what Emily was saying is that you get all of these students, they're bringing these different disciplines in, and so they feel a connection and maybe at home, but then all of those things start mixing in the class in a really wonderful way too. So you get the perspective of the physics student talking to the anthropology student, talking to the English major, and learning from each other in that way through dance. This class that I'm teaching right now, I teach it as not a subject class, not a subject like let's learn a lot about dance, but as a skills class in which dance is the big challenge. Like here's something that's hard to write about. Try. As opposed to the other class I teach, which is much more historical and chronological and subject-based. But both approaches have a lot to teach.
Thank you both, and as an alum as well, Emily, I second Brian's kudos and thanks to you for what you've done in building up the curriculum.
Can't do it alone. That's all I'll say. Takes
some
colleagues.
questions from the students who are here in the Beinecke. First is a big question, so take it where you want. How has dance on Broadway changed since Oklahoma? What are some differences between the style de Mille pioneered and Broadway dance as we see it today?
Yeah, that's a large question. So that was the 40s. After that, we get she's a kind of pioneer also in the dancer taking over as director choreographer. She pioneered that as well. Which was something that, say, Jerome Robbins picked up after that, and Bob Fosse, and dance becoming much more central in some ways to musical theater in the 40s and the 50s. And then that kind of fades out for various reasons in the 60s, 70s, 80s. 80s, most important thing is the AIDS crisis. So you have lots of people dying and lots of talent from that generation lost. And that's still a hole that you can feel today. Wow, it's a big question.
Any comments you want to make on post de Mille Broadway dance?
Yeah, again, like it's hard to summarize a sweep of what 80 years. And I'm not going to try.
I
I'm gonna
tried.
let Brian,
You-
leave it with Brian. He sees more Broadway shows and writes about them than I do.
Another question from the class, and I'll quote this directly. Where does the balance lie between historical retelling and interpretation? Do you bow to historical analysis or no?
Could you repeat that one more time?
Where does the balance lie between historical retelling and interpretation? Do you bow to historical analysis or no?
Well, you're always interpreting.
Hmm.
History is an interpretation. And I think what Brian and I both did was combine context with, as factual as possible. Loie Fuller lied about her age. Like there are ways that history evades us constantly, including from the subject themselves. But you try to bring together what you can understand about the context with the details that you're reading, and then you tell a story. That's what was fun about today, actually. We
Yes,
both told stories. What do you think, Brian?
I was going to say that I agree. The fun part is taking things that we didn't even choose these, and then trying to piece out what you can from some historical fact, and then from your own imagination. I think that's especially sometimes people bemoan the way that dance history is lost, but that's also part of the attraction for me too. That you have to use your imagination because there's just not enough fact.
To go with the fun part, question from the audience, please talk about the headdress, exclamation point. This is
well, I think you need maybe Ilona Smoji from the David Geffen School of Drama, or an expert in costuming history. I would love to research that headdress. It is spectacular. It's fountain-like. It does not look like the prairie waif, but there's hay on the floor. So what are you going to do? There weren't very many hay related pieces that she was in. So I wish I could talk about the headdress. I'll prepare, and next time I'm invited.
Okay. Brian, do you want to rise to the challenge of commenting on it or no?
No, just I feel sorry for her with the candelabra on her head and the furniture she's wearing.
An audience member commented on a perceived lack of facial expressions in de Mille's choreography, and wondered whether it's relying entirely on other body movement to convey the dancer's feelings. So I wonder if either or both of you might comment on that.
I wonder if that's just the provenance of these photos, which I think are production photos, which means not a photograph that somebody's taking of a performance, but sort of semi-staged. So I don't know that they're very representative. In fact, they don't seem very representative of the facial expressions that you'd see in some of the film footage from that time.
And I will add too, the differences between what we had to work with and what Denby had to work with, and also what Brian had to work with and what I had to work with. Brian can see a film of de Mille working with dancers, and dancers performing her style fresh off the press from her. Loie Fuller, there's no extant film of Loie Fuller. You will find imitation serpentine dance in the Lumiere brothers, Edison. They got very interested in early cinematic technologies in dance, and they got interested in Loie Fuller's dance, but she was never put on film. So we have to fill in, and a photograph tells a very narrow sliver of the picture.
To reverse engineer perhaps a question of audience member very much to the point that you've just made, asked why did French observers call Fuller's walk awkward, and speculate what were they observing. So I wonder if you might read between the lines further in those critiques of her walk, and what you think they may have been seeing, and what gave rise to that writing about her dance.
Yeah, I will say, if whoever is interested, Ann Cooper Albright wrote a whole book rebutting these impressions that she was untrained and awkward. she did in her time have a reputation for being dowdy, matronly, and frumpy. And the theory is that it also rendered her a bit unthreatening to the French, to kind of chalk. She always went around with her mother, that it somehow let her sail above any restrictions on women, because she was so unlike and was not playing the role of a classic female lead performer. I don't know how that writer could have written that. It does feel like something got, a contagiousness got in the air, and many writers started to think of Fuller as, you know, it was a reputation or an image. It happens today through social media that people acquire, and it kind of clings to them. But, you know, you look at the image that the Beinecke has, and this is a person who's trained.
Wanted to sort of follow up on the talks, and a question from Melissa that I think is for all of us. You've both given masterclass today on how to read a photograph. I really am grateful, because I can now spend more time, and I've seen all of these photos before, but even in a brief time. But I wonder if you could sort of talk a little bit more. You've become expert yourselves in reading photographs. This is over time. How do you start? And sort of tips for how one goes about reading such a dance photograph. And I think this is for your students and for all of us, Brian, your students in the classroom, but we are all your students now. So I wonder if you could sort of lay out a little bit more about how we should be reading photographs.
Isn't that what we just did? Well, I meant it to be exemplary, and I think Emily did too. And if you remember both the way that we approached it, you pay attention, you look at the details, you zoomed in on the hand, and then what do I know about the hand? What does that hand tell me? For me, it's also, I was thinking a lot about Roland Barthes and his camera lucida. He has this idea of the punctum and the studium, and I was thinking about that too. Like there's the information that the photo has, and then there's also just what it does to me. Why did that one photo draw me in much more than the others did? And trying to think through that a little bit, which is almost like psychoanalysis or something. That's part of the image reading as well.
There's the reading, and then there's the language that you put to it. And in addition to everything Brian said, which I fully agree with, in doing this exercise, and especially I'm writing about a figure who has a lot of writing about her in the time and recent scholarship over the last 25 years. But it made me want to do the opposite. And as I say at the end, I could, in my mind as I was working this, I could have tried to compete with Mallarmé. I could have tried to compete with Brian, who's very good at metaphors in his writing. And I thought, no, I'm just going to do the opposite, because then I'm not competing. I'm going to be factual. And of course, like there's a whole, it's never really a fact, you're still reading the fact, but I chose to have a different approach with the language, knowing what Fuller had generated and trying to make a different move. So, writing dance, that's the title of Brian's course. And that's what interests both of us, I think, is what language you choose.
A penultimate question from the audience, and I'll have one final question for you. The audience question was: Fuller's queer identity known to the general dance audience in her performing days, and how did it impact her career?
Yeah, she was openly lesbian, and as I noted, lived with a woman for over 20 years. And again, when you read the historians writing about Fuller, who specialize in Fuller, that somehow she sort of got a pass in every way from social norms. She was an American, so she was already exotic in Paris, and then seemed to be a kind of Midwestern with her mother. Her mother is always there. And her choice to live a queer life, a lesbian lifestyle, total pass from the French. They just continued to revere her. She was breathtakingly famous until she died in 1928. Then she went underground a bit, but she's been resuscitated.
Right. I put in the chat the link to next week's Mondays at Beinecke, which will feature 3 Yale students presenting work that they did in a seminar on Yale race and slavery, the second in a series of conversations with students from that seminar taught by Crystal Feimster and Ed Rugemer. So join us if you can for that. Before the final question, a few notes from audience members. That was exquisite, exclamation point. And an alum writes, it's wonderful to see dance taken seriously at Yale. Was not at the time that the audience member was a student here themselves. So, I think we all co-sign that gratitude that it's taken seriously. And so pose a question to each of you. Where do you hope dance studies will go in the years ahead at Yale and in the academy generally? What are your hopes and aspirations for dance studies?
More, that it grows, that it gets more institutional support from Yale, whatever Emily wants.
Well, now's a good time to also announce we have a new historian of dance joining the faculty, a specialist in Caribbean 20th century history. And we have a longtime colleague of ours who's also going to now be transitioning to full-time, Lassina Coulibaly, who's our expert in West African dance. So things are happening, and I just want to keep doing what I'm doing with great people like the two of you.
Well, thank you both. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you to your students for sharing you with us this afternoon, Brian. And we had more than 100 people signed into this. So clearly there is great interest in dance studies. And while most of us signed in cannot enroll in your class, thank you both for allowing us to be your students today. Have a great day.